Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. And imagine driving through a lovely small city in New Jersey or Connecticut, any part of New England, or even parts of Florida. Beautiful roads and boulevards, often lined with trees, small malls, residential neighborhoods with garden apartments and standalone homes. A beautiful city with children romping around in playgrounds with the most modern equipment, slides and tunnels. Imagine adults who look just like we do. Young, not so young. Men and women, husbands and wives, grandparents. Except they seem to smile a lot and tend to be very lovely, pleasant people. And also imagine in this lovely, quiet, small city, a gorgeous performing arts center with state-of-the-art acoustics and world-class performances worthy of Lincoln Center. And then imagine the reality of visiting this wonderful, bright, lovely community on a visit to Israel. We would drive for a half hour, 40 minutes or so through the rolling hills that lead to this city, which seem to separate it from any other community in close proximity. And you'll arrive at the city known as Arielle, which is about 10 miles east of what's called the Green Line, which means that Arielle is part of the West Bank and is known by most, called by most, a West Bank settlement. And as such, Arielle is not only one of the most modern and beautiful of small cities, it is also one of the most controversial of all Jewish West Bank communities. And to talk about both life in Arielle and to address some of the sensitive issues surrounding this community, I am so pleased to be joined by Dorit Nachman. And Dorit's husband was the brilliant and charismatic founding mayor of Arielle, Ron Nachman, who served as mayor from 1985 until his passing this year. Dorit, it is wonderful to have you sitting at this table. I was privileged, and I use that word strongly, I was privileged to know your husband, to spend time with your husband, to be moved by your husband. And I took a whole group of Jews from America to Israel. We went everywhere, but one of the places we made sure these people who've never seen Arielle were sure to see was your gorgeous city, Arielle. And your husband spent an hour just mesmerizing all of us. I told you off camera, I was sick with grief when he passed away. I didn't imagine, Dorit, sometimes you imagine that people you love and admire, they will be there forever. None of us lives forever. And we don't have a right to expect to live forever. But at the same time, it was a shock to me for the Jewish world to lose your husband, who I think, whether you agree with him politically, you didn't agree with him politically, he had one of the most wonderful neshamas ever. He stood for something of principle. He was passionate. He was funny. He was brilliant. And I can only imagine how life must have been for you living. How many years were you married to, Ron?
More than 40.
More than 40 years.
1970.
Well, it must have been an amazing journey for you. I am sorry it comes to an end, but I know he lives in you forever. Every single day you hear his voice, feel his presence. And for me to have Ron Nachman's wife, former wife, sitting at this table is a great honor. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'm also pleased to be joined by the executive director of Ariel, Avi Zimmerman. And you and I spent some wonderful time also together. And Avi, I also want you to know you were brilliant when we were there, and you're also
Thank
one of the
you.
most lovely people I know, and it is a thrill for me to have you now in America, sitting at this table for L'chaim on Shalom TV. Thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting us.
May I come back to you for 1 second?
Of course.
You were married for how many years again?
More than 40.
More than 40. How did you meet Ron?
I met Ron when I was in the army. His sister was the same unit with me, and I guess she just, the minute she saw me,
She knew.
Yeah.
There must have been something about you that made your friends say you would go well with Ron, because again, he was a complex person. May I say that?
Yeah.
Yes, and look, he served a long time. He served the state of Israel in many ways. He was in the Knesset, and then he was the founder of Arielle, the founding mayor, not just the mayor. If you had to explain what it was, what the dynamic was that made the two of you suitable for each other, talk to me about that. Just, I know it's personal, but what the heck?
I don't think that when we met, I had any idea that he will go
In the direction?
in the direction of איך אומרים?
A founding member of the
a founding member of the community, or doing
Yes.
something as a
pioneer.
But always the state of Israel, and according to Jabotinsky, and I always was confident wherever he did something, wherever he was a part of doing something,
It would be
was always-
successful and
it would
good.
be,
Yes. Where are you from?
Originally born and raised in New Jersey,
In New Jersey. Where in New Jersey?
West Orange.
West Orange. Avi, how do you end up in Israel?
When I was in high school, my father asked if we wanted to make Aliyah. And of course I responded, I have no idea, I've never been to Israel. We took a family trip, and it seemed to me like the place that I wanted to build my future. So I committed myself after high school, I would move to Israel. That's what I did.
So already as a high school student, you envisioned yourself in Israel.
I spent the summers in Israel, visiting Israel. Immediately after high school, I went to yeshiva for the year. After that, I served in the IDF, back and forth between the IDF and yeshiva in a program called Hesder. And then I went to study at Hebrew University.
What did you study?
I actually studied occupational therapy. And I worked in occupational therapy for about 4 years until Ron Nachman
Yes.
needed someone in the city of Arielle to run his Aliyah program from North America to Arielle. And I put OT on the side for what I thought would be about a year to 2 years. And it's been going since.
Very, very nice. Your role at Ariel has grown over the years.
I'm the executive director of Ariel Development Fund. We're involved really in education, engagement, and empowering. We're here to educate not only the residents of Ariel, but predominantly the community in Israel and internationally, specifically the Jewish community.
You want to educate the Jewish community about Ariel?
About Ariel, about the realities. There's a very significant discrepancy between the narratives about and the reality of what's going on in the city of Ariel.
Yes. Incidentally, that's what I hope those of you who are watching really get from the meeting we're going to have with Dorit and Avi, the extent to which there is a disconnect between what we hear in America and how, again, the settlements are described and what the reality is, and again, most specifically about Ariel, because it's been so controversial in the news, and we'll talk about that as we move along. You heard me describe, sort of imagining this trip that one takes to Ariel and then what one finds. When I described it, did it please you, or did you wish I had said something different?
Sounds perfect on the spot. I think there's many other things to mention in addition to the Center for Performing Arts, but it's an excellent example of, yet again, the discrepancy, because people have this anticipation that when they come to a place like Ariel, they'll see a series of tents, maybe some trailers,
Right.
and there's just no comparison.
No, it is a modern city. It's a small city. It's a little. I would not call it a town, but it's a small city. I want you to describe it. If somebody said to you, "Oh, you're from Ariel, what's it like?" You'd say,
First of all, Arielle is an excellent place to raise a family, first and foremost. My wife and I chose to move to Arielle because there's a healthy, heterogeneous community. Most places, unfortunately, in Israel have a tendency to be segregated. I'm talking about Jews versus Jews, the religious here and the non-religious there. My wife and I left a religiously monolithic community. We're religiously observant, whereas 90% of Arielle is not religiously observant. We found our homes in Arielle. You mentioned the immigrant population, a similar theme, young, old, multi-generational. Those are all things that speak to us on a community
yes,
level.
and let me just make sure we understand, because I said it to you off camera. A large percentage of the residents of Ariel are from the former Soviet Union.
That's correct.
Dorit, I think you said about 50%.
About 50%.
Okay. And so when you talk about the immigrant population in Ariel, that's what primarily you're referring to.
Correct.
It's not only Russian immigrants, but that's what you mean. And so I want to make sure the audience understands. So what you're saying is, and it is very important, and again, people who've never been to Israel or experienced Israel, you know you can be to Israel and not experience it. But you've been to Israel and experienced it, you know very often, exactly as you said, there are little compartments of Jews. And you know, sometimes you have to look and see what size yarmulke are they wearing to know where in the world you are, or are they secular? And what you're saying, Ariel has almost a unique feel of the breadth of the community in this, I keep saying gorgeous because my experience of it was, I was there incidentally on a glorious summer's day when the sun was beautiful, and whether you were walking down a street that was lined with trees or wherever you were, it was just it was delicious, you know. But I interrupted you. So you're saying
Perfect.
It was wonderful to bring up children.
Absolutely.
And what else is true about Ariel?
Well, I think there's an addendum to that, which is that it's a socially progressive community. We mentioned the immigrants. I think it's important to understand that the immigrants are not seen in Ariel as a burden.
Correct.
Rather as a community that we empower so that it can empower Ariel in return. The Russian immigrants are a perfect example. In many cases in Israel, unfortunately, the Russian immigrants have a bad reputation for bringing bad things to Israel. In our case, it's the opposite. We have Israel's newest university, the 8th university in Israel, is Ariel University. The reason that we went from a college to a university in January of this year is because our academic institution is enhanced by internationally renowned research. That is thanks to the immigrants from the former Soviet Union. When they came to teach at what was then the college, they knew nothing other than, besides teaching, research. And so we have advanced internationally recognized research.
And I want to pause again because, you know, when you said I did not mention everything, I wish I had mentioned the university, because it's one thing to have a school. Ariel does not have a school. Ariel does not have a college. You have a full-blown university which attracts people from all over Israel and even outside of Israel come now to study at the Ariel University. So again, I want people to understand, it may sound like I'm going overboard here. You know, there's no Gan Eden anywhere. But people have such a misunderstanding and a misconception of what Israel is in general, what settlements are in general, and most specifically, they don't understand how extraordinary Ariel is as this experiment that your husband and you shaped really since the 1980s. Am I correct?
Before.
Even before.
1970-something.
1977. He became mayor in 1985, I believe.
Yes.
But the city was already in progress even before that, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but he headed the nucleus that actually made the city.
Marvelous. Do you want to end something else? Anything else?
I would never finish. You're going to have to cap me.
Okay.
But I'll just add another element. I think one of the major issues when we talk about socially progressive, it's not only for ourselves and unto ourselves. One of the major misconceptions about us being in the location where we are, we call it Samaria, the city of Samaria, others call it the West Bank, is that we have some sort of problematic relationships with our neighbors, the Arabs in the region. And although relationships used to be better in the past, it's true. The more we advance with theories of two-state solutions, the more these communities are separated by definition. Nonetheless, the city of Ariel manages to overcome many of those challenges by, for example, our industrial park. We have 10,000 employees spread across roughly 200 factories. And in those 2 industrial parks, roughly half of those 10,000 employees are Arabs. And they have, for let's say the several thousand people, they're feeding tens of thousands of mouths thanks to the industrial park. So similarly, the university, which educates more than 500 Arabs, some of which are Palestinian, some of which are Israeli Arabs, again, something where we're trying to contribute to the entire region, not only to ourselves.
I saw all this. I am so glad you mentioned it. And I want to make sure people heard what you just said. You do not only educate Israeli Arabs, you educate Palestinian Arabs. Would you explain to us why in the world are Palestinians coming to Arielle to go to school?
I think the best thing to do is to ask them. It would be unfair for me to answer on their behalf. But whenever they are asked, they come for the simple reason that anyone comes to an academic institution. It's to get an education. And as much as people from the outside of Israel, the so-called international community, try to politicize our university will continue to do something very simple. It will continue to educate.
The people who come, who are Palestinian, are they treated as second-class students?
Obviously not. They probably wouldn't stick around for very long if they were.
Right. Yeah.
And there's no reason that they should,
They should what?
That they should be treated like a second-class citizen. My personal experience is when I was studying at Hebrew University, which I mentioned before, we're during the Second Intifada from the years of 2000 to 2003. And I must admit that campus in Jerusalem was very, very hostile. Not because the Arab students were made to feel like second-class students or citizens, but quite the opposite. There was the problem where many Israelis were intimidated and sometimes attacked, Israeli Jews, that is. That's not the case in Ariel University. As volatile as the situation may be beyond the city of Ariel, not within, everything is calm on campus.
As you hear Avi describe your city, first of all, do you feel he is pretty accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add, or has he covered most of it?
I think he's covered most of it, but I do want to say that the beginning, when we were a very small community, it felt more like it. For me, today...
It felt more like what?
Like very close. We were all very close.
Yes.
We knew each and everybody. And for me, as the city grew and more people came to live in Ariel, now I don't know everybody. So it feels a little,
Big.
Too big.
That is so real.
A little too big for me.
It's true in any community. I'm part of a chavurah. The chavurah starts small, and you're very close to everybody, and they're part of your family. A chavurah has a better chance of always staying intimate. But if you start a small congregation, and everybody works together to build it, and they know each other, and they're having Shabbat in each other's homes, and then you open it up, and people come in, and they don't remember the beginning, and they're there for other reasons. You're not as close to everyone, and it does feel different. It's so real, and I appreciate what you're saying. Do you remember why Ron wanted to start Ariel? What was the motivation?
The motivation was to build a Jewish community in Samaria, and by that to take hold of the land, because he always believed that the land of Israel is ours.
All of Eretz Yisrael.
All as written in the Bible. And that we are there by right. And that's... and then he thought that the location of Ariel would be right, because he then was working for the Israel Military Industries, and he thought that about 40 kilometers from Tel Aviv, the people could still work wherever they did, and they won't be a burden on the government in terms of
Dependence
or
בעברית.
מקום תעסוקה.
A place of
a
employment.
place of employment. And I don't remember when it was, but Moshe Dayan came out to the young population of Israel and said, in one hand, you have to carry the security flag, and on the other hand, the Hityashvut flag. So that was the perfect place. In
Settlement.
Yeah, right. There was an ideology
Yes.
behind Arielle.
Yes.
To what extent do you now have people who live in Arielle who love it, but for whom the ideology is either secondary or not important at all?
I think it's fascinating when you look at the voting outcomes of the residents of Arielle, how they match almost to a T with the national voting outcomes. And you have everyone voting for every party, including for Arab parties. I imagine those are students at the university that are voting for the Arab parties, the Arab students there, but I can't say for sure.
Yes.
So there's really a cross-section. The ideology is also a unique one to begin with, because as opposed to the other communities in Samaria, which were run by the religious nationalist movement, this was run by people who were decidedly secular, proudly secular, and they came not only with a different ideology, but also with a different strategy. Instead of doing things behind the government's back, they wouldn't move forward without government permission. It was Shimon Peres, then the Minister of Defense in 1977, who signed the papers that authorized the move to the city of Arielle. So everything was done with that perspective. So the ideology is something that I think most people identify with it, but there's so many different nuances. And Israeli politics are so dynamic that it's hard to really say where everybody fits in.
Okay. Let's pick up on that for one moment. Arielle did not start as an illegal outpost.
Correct.
Never.
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 This was a community sanctioned from the very beginning by the Israeli government.
Correct.
Was your husband secular?
Yes.
Okay. He believed in what is popularly called here in America Greater Israel.
Yes.
And he believed it should include what we call the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. And he did this because of a historical nationalist
Yes.
perspective. If you read anything in the Torah and the Bible, you understand that the Jewish people were throughout Eretz Yisrael, and it was for political reasons having nothing to do with Jewish that a partition was suggested by the United Nations in 1947, adopted by the Jews said yes, the Arabs said no, and as a result we went to war. At the end of a war there was a ceasefire line. That ceasefire line could have been anywhere. It was not a ceasefire line drawn by any international body. It was a ceasefire line because the Arabs didn't want the Jews anywhere
Right.
in Eretz Yisrael.
And they still
that
don't.
that ceasefire line became almost a de facto accepted border of the modern state of Israel. But it was never set by international rules. It was set as a result of a ceasefire line. And what your husband was saying was, the ceasefire line should not determine where Jews live. We should live throughout all of Eretz Yisrael.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wanted to build a community in Samaria, on what we call the West Bank, and he did this in Arielle.
Mark, if I may just refine
Please,
some of that.
absolutely.
Just for the viewers, real quickly. So actually the Green Line was drawn by a man by the name of Ralph Bunche in the context of the United Nations. It was drawn with a green pen, hence the Green Line. And it was agreed upon, indeed, not as a border, but as a ceasefire line. It became irrelevant as a ceasefire line following the Six-Day War in 1967, when there was a new ceasefire line, and that was the Jordan River. And so Israel had, at that point, sovereignty over, not sovereignty in terms of annexation. Israel did not annex the so-called West Bank, but Israel had control over this area. And it was only after that point when Ron, and not only on his own volition, but again with the government sanction, moved into Arielle. There's one more important point. This was actually done along with an understanding from the State Department during President Jimmy Carter's administration, because the Carter administration was brokering the peace deal with Egypt in 1979. And before that point, Israel said, if we give away the Sinai Peninsula, which was a huge area, vast territory, then we need to be able to secure our country, which otherwise, if you follow the Green Line, you would have parts of Israel that are only 9 miles in width. And that's obviously an unsustainable situation. And therefore, we need to have places for our security. Arielle was one of the 6 locations that was agreed upon.
You're telling me the Carter administration agreed to Arielle?
Yes, but not in writing. Not in writing. I actually spoke with a consular officer from the American consulate in Jerusalem, and I asked him to look it up for me, if they have it in writing anywhere. He said he'd get back to me. I haven't heard from him yet.
Uh-huh. We talked a moment ago about this idea of Greater Israel, and this followed the Six-Day War, and then Menachem Begin becomes prime minister. You've already mentioned that your husband was a huge fan of Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky, Beitar, Irgun, Cherut, Likud. Jabotinsky and Begin, of course, becomes the inheritor. And when Menachem Begin became prime minister, there was a period of time when there was a concerted effort, which really spanned both Likud and Labor, that we were going to develop the West Bank as a place where Jews would live also. And so there were many settlements that were begun. And Ariel Sharon was helping to sort of mastermind how this was done. Over a period of time, there was a turning away from that notion. There are many people now who believe it was a mistake. Your husband did not think it was a mistake. Your husband argued through his entire life, and we heard him do so, that it was a mistake to reject the notion of settling all of the land. And it was not like he wanted to deport Palestinians who were living on the West Bank, but he believed ultimately we should be living in peace with them, as you do in Arielle, but under Israeli sovereignty, not Palestinian sovereignty. That was his position. And I'm very glad you gave some of the history of Arielle, because I want people here not only to have a feeling, okay, well, here's a modern city on the West Bank, isn't that interesting? But there is controversy to it. And before we go into the controversy, it was good for you to set sort of the historical context. Number one, it was not an illegal action in any way. It was both promoted by, it was endorsed by the Israeli government. You're telling me that at least in an informal way, the Carter administration gave some blessing to, some hexure to the...
Blessing might be a strong word.
Well, they didn't oppose it, and they
Correct,
didn't tell you not to do it.
There was an understanding.
There was an understanding. But the way you said it, it had an important role in the defense of Israel at a time when Israel was making concessions to Egypt in the peace accord that was developed by Jimmy Carter, Anwar Sadat, and Menachem Begin. And that was the era. You know, very often people who know no history don't remember that events came out of a moment. And it's not fair to bring today and impose it necessarily on decisions that were made in all good faith with people who had every intention of doing the best they possibly could, and that in some way reflected where Ariel was in the development. Now, lo and behold, artists who at one time played in this spectacular performance center at Ariel said they're going to go on a boycott. They will not come to Ariel anymore because it is a West Bank settlement. How do you feel about that, and what do you want to say about it? And what would you know? Let me say this: if some of the artists were here at this table, I don't know if you ever had a chance to speak to them. What would you say to them, and what do you want American Jewry to understand?
I would say 2 things. The first is just come and see that which you choose to boycott, because I have no doubt in my mind that not a single one of those artists had ever set foot in Ariel. Had they set foot in Ariel, they would have understood everything that you've described earlier. And it would be very difficult to boycott real human beings. But then I would say to them, thank you for everything that you've done, and I want you to continue boycotting us. Because we've learned quite really consistently, ever since that boycott, that what P.T. Barnum said, that there's no such thing as bad publicity, just make sure to spell my name right, is 100% accurate. There were 36 artists that boycotted the Ariel Regional Center for the Performing Arts 2 months before it opened. It hadn't even opened, they were already boycotting us. 36 performing artists, some of which are very renowned in Israel. I'm not going to undermine their significance. But the trade-off was that the Israeli people on the whole got up on their hind feet and said, excuse me, but Ariel is not to be boycotted. First of all, Ariel is not to be boycotted because if you're going to boycott anywhere in the so-called West Bank, Ariel is not the place, because Ariel is a consensus community. It's not going anywhere. Number one. Number two, isn't it ironic that artists who tend to be boycotted themselves are engaging in a boycott.
Yes.
The concept of the arts, as we see it, as residents of Arielle see it, is that the arts is something that should open people's minds. It should engage people in new ways of looking at things. And so when The Road to Damascus, which is considered an anti-settlement performance, came to the theater in Arielle, it was sold out. And the people of Arielle came to watch because we are happy to be exposed to ideas that are different and opposed to ours. In effect, those who boycotted us only boycotted themselves. They boycotted their own ideas, which will no longer be heard by the people of Arielle.
Is Arielle an obstacle to peace?
Absolutely none. I believe that Arielle is the greatest tool for peace because peace is made between neighbors. The only way to make peace is for the people of Arielle and our Arab neighbors to be speaking together. What's happening right now is the opposite. There's an international community, whatever that means, who's trying to get involved, come up with solutions, and those solutions have not proven themselves for the last 45 years. Perhaps we're using an unsuccessful formula. Mm-hmm. Let's try a new formula. Let's try to have the people of Arielle who are experienced in working with their Arab neighbors work with their Arab neighbors.
If one is in Jerusalem and one goes to the Etzion block or goes to Ma'ale Adumim, goes to Efrat, it feels like it's a stone's throw away. And what people tend to say is, they're almost the suburbs of Jerusalem. These, again, the use of the word settlement is such a misnomer here. These are small cities, little real full communities. But people say, well, the ring around Jerusalem of these settlements, they're obviously going to stay, and if there's a peace agreement, they will be incorporated into the state of Israel. One of the things that's said about Arielle is, well, it's 10 miles into the West Bank. It's not a suburb of any city. It's true people commute from Arielle, for example, into Tel Aviv. But it's not a suburb. And therefore, it somehow violates more of the notion that the West Bank will be given to the Palestinians in a two-state solution. And how can they have their own state if right smack in the middle of it is a Jewish enclave, a city of itself, Arielle? Is there anything you want to say about that argument and how people distinguish what Arielle is from Ma'ale Adumim?
First of all, it's 100% accurate. Arielle is different than those communities. It's the only one of the three consensus communities that stand alone and becomes the point of reference and not in reference to something else. It's 100% accurate. It's just inaccurate in the assessment of whether or not that's something that's going to be an obstacle. The problem with the two-state solution is not the city of Arielle, it's not Jerusalem, and it's not Tel Aviv. It's the fact that there are very few people who are actually interested in a two-state solution, including the Palestinian leadership. And I don't really want to speak for them. I think you can just read their websites and see their information. They don't seem to be taking any steps, no matter what it is that we concede, that's going to work for them. If there's no Arielle and there's no Jerusalem and there's no Tel Aviv, it's still not going to be enough.
I understand, but I don't think you're wrong. And many people come here and are very articulate in expressing that. But I'm asking a theoretical question. If tomorrow the entire Palestinian leadership changed and there was a leadership that really wanted to live side by side with the state of Israel, no more rockets, no more textbooks, no more television, nothing was aimed at hurting Israel. I don't believe it's going to happen. But if we imagine that scenario where there was a Palestinian leadership that honestly, genuinely wanted to live in peace with the state of Israel, didn't want to see Israel destroyed, and now it was only a matter of practical issues that we had to overcome, is there a way to create a two-state solution that leaves Arielle intact?
I think there's absolutely no problem with it at all whatsoever. In other words, I don't see any problem when there's no security issue why people can't live side by side. Why can't we? We can live here and my neighbors can live next to me. And really the only thing that the concern is not in terms of a Palestinian state. They speak of a contiguous Palestinian state. That is correct. It would be contiguous, though there would be some routes that would have to go around the way theoretically. If there were no security concerns, everyone can crisscross in each and every direction. So, correct. In as much as there is a security concern, That's correct. If you're going to continue to fire at us, continue terrorism, yes, we're going to have all the more need to retain the status as it is right now. If you relinquish your call to violence, then there really won't be a problem.
Have you experienced terrorism in Arielle?
Thank God in the city itself we have not, but in the periphery of the city on a number of occasions, yes, both at the entrance to the city and along the road. Ironically, I'm a reserve soldier in the IDF, as with most Israelis my age, and ironically my last reserve duty was just outside of Arielle. I was on the periphery of Arielle as a soldier. Coincidentally. I've been everywhere. This time I was outside of Arielle. Very convenient, by the way. Just the very day that I completed my service, another troop replaced us. And when they replaced us later that evening, there was a stone throwing on the road. And a stone throwing is not a pebble throwing, it's a stone throwing. And it caused a severe accident, and there's a young girl,
3 years old.
3-year-old girl, who's still hospitalized because she's not doing very well because of that stone throwing. And there's a whole movement now in Israel to define stone throwing as terrorism and not as just general violent disobedience. So yes, there have been incidents, there have been recent incidents, and that's life in Israel.
What do you think the tone of the relationship is between Arielle and its nearest Arab neighbors in terms of cities or villages?
Not nearly as good as it used to be. Before the so-called peace process, the people of Arielle would do their shopping in nearby Salfit, just to the south of Arielle. Remember, as Dorit mentioned, Ron Nachman came to the city of Arielle when there were when it did start with 2 tents. It didn't start as the development. It started with 2 tents. And to build something from nothing means that you had to find a place to go and buy your milk. So where did you go? Naturally, you'd go to Salfit. And the residents of Arielle would go on a Saturday, not observant, not secular Jews. They would drive on Saturday to go to Salfit to buy their pita and hummus.
This is an Arab village.
An Arab village. And that was fine from 1978 until 1987. 1987
Not only food. Ron used to go to Salfit to have a haircut and a shave.
Really?
And I remember people were amazed. He's sitting at the barber's shop. And
Tommy Lapid.
Tommy Lapid
Ron
was
always
there
told a
with him.
story about Tommy Lapid,
Yes.
Yair Lapid's father.
Yes.
Who, when Ron took him on a ride through Salfit, Tommy Lapid made fun of Ron for having a haircut with an Arab because the Arab took the razor to his neck to give him a little bit of a shave. And Tommy Lapid thought that was somewhat surprising. And but for the people of Arielle, it was natural. It was natural to associate with our neighbors.
What happened in 1987?
1987 was the first Intifada. At that point, it was too dangerous to go into from Arielle into Salfit. That was fine. By then, we had our own stores. They lost our business. We lost the good pita and hummus. We had to settle for the Israeli stuff. Then
Abu Ali came on.
Abu Ali, right. So there are some Arab establishments on the way into Arielle, and you can still get it if you want. But in the year 2000, it took a turn for the worst. Nobel Peace Laureate Yasser Arafat decided to launch a terror war against Israel, the second Intifada. At that point, the people from Salfit went onto the mountain between Salfit and Arielle and fired with the Kalashnikov rifles that Israel allowed them to have. They fired at Arielle's civilian population. This was unbearable, obviously. And as a result, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, set up a post called Antenna Hill Post. Now, if you look at that post, it overlooks Arielle on the one side and Salfit on the other side. When I was serving recently, I was at that post. If you choose an anti-Israel, anti-IDF narrative, you'll say, hey, look, the Israelis have a military occupation over Salfit. Look at them with a tower looking into Salfit. But if you know anything about your history, you understand that it is not a military occupation, it is a military defense mechanism. The Israeli Defense Forces, we didn't have to be there from 1978 until 2000.
If people who are opposed to Arielle were here today, one of the things they would say to you is this: Israel has a responsibility as the more powerful partner in this potential peace. As the more powerful party, Israel has a responsibility to do everything it can to create an aura of peace, to lay the groundwork for peace. And that the Palestinians have their own suspicions. that although from our perspective, for me, it seems so cut and dry, black and white. It does. And it's not that the black and white means Israel is never wrong, or Israel never does something in excess, or Israel never makes a mistake. They're people. Of course we make mistakes. But if you ask me, what do I feel the overall philosophy is, Israel basically says, all I want to do is live with you in peace. Live with me in peace. We'll work out everything. We'll work out water. We'll work out travel. We'll work out security. But one thing you've got to do. You've got to really want to live with me. And then there are people who say, from the Palestinian side, there are things that make Palestinians suspicious and uneasy about thinking that Israelis do want to live with them in peace. And therefore, one of the things Israel has to do is create a climate which says to the Palestinians, look what we'll do. Look how we're trying to pave the way. Look how we're trying to avoid or creating any obstacle. If this is going to be your land, if we're really serious about the West Bank being your land, then obviously we have to really sort of respect what is going to happen. And although from our perspective, Jews should have a right to live in your country as well as Arabs live in Israel, at the moment, if this is what you don't want to talk about that, we won't talk about that. But we shouldn't be building settlements or adding to settlements on land which we're at the same time saying we want to ultimately see this be your formal country. And therefore, those who argue against Ariel say, what you're doing is you are putting up a red flag, almost like waving it in front of a bull and saying, here we are, and while we say we want a two-state solution, Ariel's presence proves that there are many in Israel who quite honestly have your husband's perspective, that really we have no responsibility to leave the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and we really don't intend to do so. And those who are upset with Ariel see it as a symbol of those in Israel who really don't ever intend to leave the West Bank and hand it over to the Palestinians. That's what they would say if they were here. What would you say to them?
First of all, those in Israel who have no intention of leaving at least all of the areas, it's important to distinguish. There are many who think that we should leave some of the areas and not others. That's the concept of having these consensus areas. I saw a recent poll. I don't know who conducted it. I think it has to be investigated further. But I just saw this posted the other day that somewhere around 80%, if not more, of Israelis support annexing at least part of Judea and Samaria, places like Ariel, for example. So those Israelis that think that way are not in any way in the minority. That's important to recognize. And therefore, Israelis don't see a point in moving populations, neither Arab nor Israeli. And when that's your starting point, then the rules of the game are really completely different. The issue of creating an aura of peace is 100% necessary. I think we have to take out some stumbling blocks, namely everything that we've created, that the State of Israel created in the Palestinian Authority. Ask the Palestinians, don't ask me. Ask the Palestinians what they think about the Palestinian Authority, and then come to the obvious conclusions. But let's put them aside. Let's talk about what Israel can do. One of the things that I like about choosing the international narrative as opposed to the Israeli narrative is the following. And just to specify that for a second, the international narrative speaks of Ariel, as you referred to earlier, as controversial. The Israeli narrative speaks about Ariel as consensus. But let's opt for a moment to take the international narrative. It's an excellent narrative because it holds Israel to a higher moral standard than its neighbors. Fair, unfair, it doesn't matter. That's what it's doing. I welcome that international narrative. I welcome the pressure. I think that we can be held to a higher standard. I think that is our responsibility, and I do think we are in more of a position of power to help our Arab neighbors. So, for example, take the fact that Ariel is where it is. When Ron Nachman first came to the city of Ariel, and they started bringing in the electric and water lines, he said to the Arab villages, the Arab villagers and the mayors, the muhtars in the area, I want to connect you to water and electricity. They said no. Why no? Because it will be seen in their minds as a sign of annexation. Ron sent them to the king of Jordan to get special permission to be connected to our infrastructure. they received that permission. Today they're connected. Those other areas that today are in Judea and Samaria that are not connected may just be because they didn't have a Ron Nachman to force them to be connected. So yes, we can do a lot to mitigate their circumstances, their adverse circumstances, to bring them up to par with Israel. We're doing everything we can with Israeli Arabs today, and we can do so with Palestinian Arabs as well. There's a lot that can be done in terms of transportation, in terms of education, in terms of general quality of life. But that's when we work together. The paradigm shift here is not only about getting the Palestinian Authority to sidestep the issue because they've proven themselves to be an impediment to peace, but actually to, like you said, to slow down with the two-state solution. It's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It hasn't happened for 45 years. We're not on the cusp of that. Let's talk about the here and now.
Most American Jews don't understand that on the West Bank, there are regions, A, B, and C, and that the amount of Israeli control, Israeli military presence, differs in A, B, and C, and that in the areas designated as A, the State of Israel really has nothing to do with them, and unless there's a problem, the Israeli military is not present. That basically the Palestinians are living their own life, they elect their own city officials, they administer everything that goes on in the community. They are, in essence, autonomous, self-fulfilling communities. And there are those who even argue that they already constitute, in essence, a Palestinian state of their own, because Israel has nothing to do with them. Then there's a section B that's sort of murky for various reasons, and then there's a section C. Section C is where basically the settlements are, and these are parts of the West Bank which do have Israeli control. Israelis live there, and for our audience's knowledge, Arielle is included in Section C, correct?
Correct, Area
Okay.
C.
And there are many people who argue that when there is, if there ever should be, a two-state solution, much of C is going to become part of the readjusted boundaries that are agreed to and will become part of the State of Israel. So, for example, when anybody talks now about a two-state solution, all of the settlements that ring Jerusalem are always assumed that they will become part of formal Israel in a two-state solution. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. To what extent, since Arielle is also in Section C, do you believe it would apply to Arielle as well? To what extent do Israelis say Arielle's in Section C, all the settlers in Section C should become part of the modern State of Israel once there is a two-state solution, and carve out parts that are not C for the Palestinian state? So what I'm asking you is, when you hear Israelis talk, to what extent is the fact that Arielle is part of Section C, Area C, is that in some way a prelude to a vision for what could be later on?
It's not specifically because it's part of C, which it is, although shortly before the recent elections, Naftali Bennett, who heads the Jewish Home Party, came up with a plan to annex all of Area C. In practice, it's unclear what all Israelis agree with. We do know that whether you take the Ehud Olmert or the Ehud Barak plans, which were offered to the Palestinian Authority, offering anywhere between 97 and 99% of disputed territory in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, the city of Arielle was always on the Israel side, always, consistently. And therefore, there's no reason to even imagine that any Israeli sovereign government would compromise the security of the State of Israel by compromising Arielle. There are other indicators. As recent as 2008, we completed the major highway that connects Tel Aviv to Arielle, Highway number 5, where that terror attack that I mentioned happened only a few weeks ago. The security fence of Israel, which really has two functions. One is security, as its name indicates, but also everyone understands that when it was constructed, it was designed as a predetermination of ultimate borders should there ever be a two-state solution. That fence includes Arielle on the Israel side. In other words, it goes out of its way just to include Arielle on the Israel side. That's where the claims of the Palestinian Authority, or excuse me, Palestinian state contiguity come in. They say, well, we got this fence jutting into Arielle. How are we going to have free access from one side of the fence to the other? But the point is, the fence is there. Every Israeli understands that Arielle is there to stay. There are those who are opposed to it. Consensus never means that everyone agrees. And Jews, I mean, come on. There's not going to be something we're all going to agree about, certainly not this issue. But as a consensus and as an Israeli policy statement, Arielle is here to stay.
You are very articulate and you explain things very, very well. And I don't know if you ever would want a life in Israeli politics, because it sounds even worse than American politics in some way.
You're absolutely right.
But you really speak with a certain kind of leadership that is very, very lovely for us to hear. And it's really wonderful that the two of you have been able to put some of this into perspective.
If I may, Mark, I think it's actually interesting to know what's happening to Dorit. We didn't get a chance to mention this, but last week, Dorit received Israel's equivalent of the Nobel Prize. We call it the Israel Prize.
Yes.
Our greatest honor.
Very prestigious.
She received it on behalf of Ron.
Kol hakavod.
He could have got up on stage and talked about the city of Arielle as always. He chose not to. He spoke only about his wife Dorit and standing by him all these years, and especially in the past year when he had so many medical issues to take care of, and she was there for him, of course.
Well, so it is an honor that is given to both of you, and his name may be on it, your name is on it also. It has been spectacular that you have spent this much time with me. When I come to Israel next, we will go to Arielle.
Absolutely.
I really hope everybody understands it is not what you hear in the media. It's not what you read in the New York Times. Right. It is a spectacular place of lovely people who are really doing some extraordinary things, even with the Palestinian and Arab neighbors. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha. I hope you're often here. And I wish you especially good health, happiness with all of your grandchildren, and they continue to come one after the other. And that you always have a home here at this table. Do you understand?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kol tuv v'hatzlacha.
Thank you.
Kol tuv v'hatzlacha. Thank you very, very much. My meeting with Dorit Nachman and Avi Zimmerman, who told us all about Arielle. I hope you've enjoyed meeting them, and I hope it's changed some of your own perception about something that very often is mischaracterized horribly in the American media in general, and even within the American Jewish community. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. And if you want to be in touch with Dorit or Avi yourself, you email me, and I will pass your emails on to them. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, through life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.